one thing I think that is of greater concern now today in Sri Lanka, for instance, it's the early assumption was that food production would get impacted, but thankfully that was not so. But the concern now is that we are seeing very high and rising price inflation related to food. And that was something that we experienced even before COVID, but for different reasons. Prior to COVID, the food price inflation was driven by more of weather conditions and impacts on harvest. But today it is that production has not been impacted. Farmers are harvesting, they're bringing their produce to markets with the greatest difficulty, but having brought that produce, then they find that there is no way of getting that distributed to the rest of the country. So rising food prices at the end of May, food price inflation is over 10% in Sri Lanka. Non-food price inflation is under something 2%. And this is a concern not only in my country, in this region, as well as outside. So I think that has serious implications for poverty, because poorer households spend more of their income on food. And that impact the burden is made worse, because when we look at the concentration of poor, most are to be found in households that engage in agricultural activities. And a third factor that we are seeing in Sri Lanka is that, job employment losses in manufacturing and services has been far greater and less so in agriculture. But we are seeing a shift of labor back into agriculture. And that's not productive labor. It is simply what you might call disguised unemployment. Because there are no job opportunities outside, they're going back into the agriculture sector. So all in all, I think the going forward concerns will be on how this is going to play out in terms of poverty numbers and what it will also mean for issues of equity. Now, Sri Lanka's policy stance, and very broadly with COVID-19, was to say that we are going to focus on national food production, pursue self-sufficiency in food, and alongside that, we imposed a fair bit of restrictions on imports of food, trying to encourage more import substitution in food production, partly related, of course, to foreign exchange pressures, etc., that we are facing. Now, that has meant there has been stockpiling. Policy uncertainty has kicked in. There is price volatility, and has really not provided a long-term sort of assurance that policy stance will help us to ensure that we have resilient food production systems after the immediate sort of crisis, COVID crisis is over. The second related factor to that is also what we are seeing is food production has its own set of problems, but increasingly it is also a fact of inadequate storage, transportation infrastructure that is hampering the distribution of food supplies in these kinds of emergency situations. And we are not using digital platforms. I think someone mentioned that digital sort of transformation is essential for us to recover from this in the long term. And we are seeing that, for instance, in the case of rice, the government has no data and no way of tracking how much rice is being hoarded by the private sector. And they've tried to bring in all kinds of rules and regulations to force traders to declare how much they're holding, but it's simply not taking any sort of, it's not much of a success. So I think the post-pandemic sustained food system sort of planning has to take on board digital platforms and how we can effectively use them to meet these kinds of emergency situations, because I don't think we've seen the last of a pandemic. We are more than likely to see recurrence of such episodes in the coming years as well.